In this chapter, we'll focus on California's legislative politics, looking at the state Senate and state assembly. As your text asks, which state pays its legislators more than any other state but forces them to leave office as soon as they gain valuable experience? The answer is California, and that's a key to some of the challenges we face in our system caused by term limits. California's term limits in Proposition 140 in 1990, assembly members were limited to 3 two-year terms, senators 2 four-year terms. Proposition 28 in 2012 changed that a bit. Legislators can now serve a total of 12 years in the legislature, regardless of the chamber. Take a quick look at California's legislative history in the early years. It's an amateur body dominated by farmers. We mentioned before, beholden to the Southern Pacific Railroad. Progressives came in, limited the power of the legislature, approved the initiative, and that allowed people to compete with the legislature for policy-making power. And we saw a lot of stagnation in the legislature amid real change in California from the 20s to the 60s. We saw tremendous growth, tremendous diversity in California, but not in the legislature in that period. In that time, no county could have more than one state senator. Rural interests dominated, and policymaking was really fractionalized by region, and we saw a growth in special interests. When we saw a period of reform in the 60s, the Constitution Revision Commission, the legislature could govern most of its affairs, and in 1966, the voters approved Prop 1A, which created a full-time legislature. And that period also saw the one person, one vote concept, where it was no longer one senator for each county, that the districts were divided up by population, and we saw new legislators who were younger, better educated, and had more professional background. The golden years of the 60s and 70s, we saw with a growing economy, salaries and staffs grew. We saw a 2-year legislation session that allowed bills to stay alive longer, giving them a greater chance of passage. Well, let's look at the factors that were leading up toward term limits, that we saw divided government that was routine, Republican governor, Democratic legislature. Really, policy deadlock was quite common then. The initiative process became a driving force. Voters were less partisan, but legislators were becoming more partisan. The media spotlight was on how campaign funds were raised and spent, focusing on Assembly Speaker Willie Brown, how he raised and distributed campaign funds. And legislators were looking to serve on what's called juice committees. They're committees where industries that were interested in the actions of those committees would contribute more to the campaigns. The result of these factors, Prop 140 and term limits. That's helped lead today to some of the dysfunction we see. We see high member turnover. We see high staff turnover, less experienced people working on staff, and really a greater ideological divide between Republicans and Democrats. Let's look briefly at what the legislature does. First, policy making. It acts on bills. It acts on constitutional amendments and resolutions. Second function is representation. You represent your district, the geographic representation. You also represent the social and cultural characteristics of people in your district. You have specific representation where you're dealing with constituents on matters that require individual attention. And you also have functional representation, whereas we talked about earlier in the AGPT chapter about trustees, delegates, and politicos. One other function, executive oversight, where you go through the process of authorization and appropriation. For purposes of your exam, you need to know the authorization. In the authorization process, the legislature gives authority for an agency program to exist. In the appropriation process, the legislature creates spending authority, thereby allowing the agency to implement the program. Authorization simply gives authority for the program to exist, but it's the appropriation process that allows the agency to implement the program. And legislative members also do civic education through office hours, speaking to community groups, service clubs, that sort of thing. How do members of the legislature get there and stay there? How are they recruited? Some are self-starters. Some are recruited by others through the sponsorship. Some it's a combination. And really a power of incumbency helps people stay there. That as recently as 2010, 100% of incumbents who sought office were elected to the California legislature. What are some of the rewards quickly of the office? Policy achievement. That you're finding solutions to challenges facing California. That material benefits. You get a legislative salary, you get some of the perks of the office, so there are those kinds of benefits. And something called psychic satisfaction, that somehow your ego is helped by the attention that you get from lobbyists, constituents, and virtually everyone you meet who will be paying deference to you. How do they stay? A lot of it has to do with reapportionment politics. You've heard of gerrymandering. That's a case where legislative districts are drawn in such a way that provides an advantage to one candidate or one party over the other. What we saw in Proposition 11 of 2008, while before 2008 those lines were drawn by political parties, Proposition 11 was really a groundbreaking initiative. It gave authority for legislative districts and State Board of Equalization members to a 14-member commission, an independent 14-member commission. November 2010, congressional districts were added to the commission's areas of responsibility. Let's go quickly through how the legislature is organized, the Assembly and the Senate. The Assembly, the leader, is the Speaker. The Assembly Speaker, that's the person with the most power in the Assembly. There's also, he or she is elected by the majority party caucus. So the majority party gets to pick the Speaker. Another Assembly post, the Speaker pro tem. It's a member of the Speaker's party and exercises the powers of the Speaker if the Speaker isn't available, if the Speaker is absent. And the other Assembly posts with power, you have your majority leader and minority leader. In the Senate, the President pro tem is the person who handles the day-to-day leadership. The Lieutenant Governor is really the person who has comparable powers to the Vice President, but the day-to-day operations really run by the President pro tem. And a lot of power stays with the 5-member Rules Committee in the Senate. And it's the President pro tem and then 2 other senators from each party's caucus. Legislation goes through committees. Quickly, the types of committees: standing committees. They're permanent committees. They process legislation. Fiscal committees handle bills that require spending money. Conference committees, they work out the differences if there's a different version of the same bill passed in the chambers. Select committees, they deal with various issues facing California with long-term solutions in mind. And joint committees include members from both parties. The staff, very professional staff in California state government. But in the early days, we had the Legislative Council of California that helped draft bills. California State Auditor, that was established in 1955 to provide fiscal oversight of state agencies. But a real key agency right now is the Legislative Analyst's Office, and that gives nonpartisan advice on fiscal and policy issues to the legislature. Very quickly through the legislative process, as you see, bills are introduced. That if you have an idea, you can introduce a bill. It's sent to a committee, depending on what committee it's sent to or how many committees it's sent to. That plays a key role in the fate. If you make it through the committees, you go on the floor for votes on the floor in the House and the Assembly or the Senate. If there are different versions of the bill, it goes to a conference committee for final approval. Once each house has signed off on the same version of the bill, it goes to the governor for final action. And another key part of the legislative process is what's called the third house. Those are lobbyists, they're interest groups. The types of things that they do to influence the legislative process, 6 different ways. They make campaign contributions. Their physical presence makes a difference. Simply being there is important in the process. These lobbyists, these interest groups, they know the process. They can provide information on legislation to legislators and their staff. That has an impact. They can do coalition building. They can bring groups together in support of or in opposition to a piece of legislation. And they can do grassroots lobbying. Please use this PowerPoint as well as the other information and course documents as you prepare for your weekly quiz. Thank you.